Hi, welcome back to the Fourfold Path. I'm Jordan, the host of the podcast, and in this episode we're going to be working on the worlds that our characters inhabit in our role-playing game, as I sort of promised last time. And before we get too far in, I know I said early on we wouldn't start with tooling. Feel like I lied a little bit, so that I don't have to take so many notes and you don't have to hear the taka 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 of me typing as I go along and do this. I'm going to be using Whisper on the back end to convert the audio track of this video into a transcription. I'm doing that for myself anyway, for like show notes and the transcript to upload to along with the video, but also in this particular case, as I dictate some things about the world, as we make those concrete, it'll be useful to be able to get a text version of that and pull it into something like Obsidian, which is what I use for most of my note-taking and gameplay. So, first things first, I think starting with sort of some inspiration. So in my mind, I know vaguely what kind of story I want to tell. I want this to be a story about two star-crossed lovers from different worlds who find each other and eventually get together. It's going to be rocky at first. That's sort of what I have in mind, in my heart here. And when I think about that in fiction, especially in situations where characters cross across worlds, there are a couple of things that come to mind. There's, maybe I'll move this over into frame. There's the Aha Take On Me music video. There's Captain N, which doesn't have a lot of romance, but is definitely a thing. For those of you who are too young to remember Captain N, Captain N was a cartoon show about a teenager with a Letterman jacket who got sucked into video games, and he had a giant living Game Boy as a companion. He shot things with a light gun. It was weird, but very enjoyable. There's literally the whole ass isekai genre that fits here, with some character being pulled into a world. And there is a note for me that I'm going to need to find a different Sharpie, because this one is slowly running out of ink. Maybe a little different, but thematically appropriate. Did any of you play Comics Zone for the Sega Genesis? It was a side-scrolling beat-em-up, but it did a lot of fourth wall breaking. The character that you played in there could do things like flip over the bars that separated panels and climb through them, break through the wall, and so on. And that was really cool. So thematically, I want a romance, but I don't think I want the romance to be the front car in the story. I think that it should be some sort of adventure story. Where we go off and find the MacGuffin and save the world, and that's the crisis that ends up bringing these characters together. So I think that there's a real question here with the isekai thing, right? Like, I've got these two characters, I know they're in separate worlds, and there's a real question of mechanically, how are they going to get together eventually? There are a couple of genres that support that really well, right? Fantasy supports it very well, and anything with techno-futurism, science fiction supports it well, because at a certain point, any sufficiently advanced technology is just magic. So both of those would let us get to where we wanted to go. Oh man, what's the name of that Macaulay Culkin movie not Home Alone, where he's a child in a library and eventually he becomes animated. Is it Page Master? And he goes through a lot of literary things. I can't spell Macaulay Culkin thing, so I'm just going to assume that I'm right and that it is in fact the Page Master. I'll have to look it up later. That's another maybe good touch point. Oh, and then there was that one episode of Futurama where Fry and Leela run through books trying to escape the giant brains. So, here are a bunch of different ways that moving through worlds shows up in fiction, is I guess what I'm saying. Because here, let's rearrange these. So isekai is an overarching genre, right? Captain N and Comic Zone are very similar in that they are, and really the AHA, well, Comic Zone and AHA Take On Me are similar in that they move through a single video game world. I think Captain N was also that way. It's been like 30 years since I've seen it. Now, that one episode of Futurama and the Page Master were very different in that they jumped through a lot of worlds. And so in the space of things where you jump through a lot of worlds, you've also got shit like sliders. Stargate, I think, fits in that pocket pretty nicely too. Maybe also Mighty Max. I don't remember enough of Mighty Max to know. I think he ended up going through multiple dimensions. You know, I would be remiss. Richard Garriott's The Ultima series also really fits in this bucket because the Avatar like goes through a portal in his back fucking yard and ends up in the world of Britannia where he saves it. So, here are sort of the questions that we need to answer. How many worlds? And is the transition controlled? I think a multiverse story could be interesting, but it's not where I want to start. So I think we're gonna fixate on a single world. Well, not a single world, obviously there are at least two, but a single jump. There is a single jump between worlds that the characters experience. And then there's a question of, is it controlled or not? Because in the Ultimate series, it was relatively controlled. In Stargate and Sliders, it's extremely controlled. And in that one episode of Futurama, also, the characters have control over where they're going. But in, well, they can choose where to go through, or they can choose to slide, right? And they can choose to go through the portal and plug in some runes, but they don't actually know what's on the other side, so it's like light control. Whereas in both the AHA music video and in the Captain N series, I don't think that it was particularly controlled. Oh god, how could I forget? I'm gonna talk about sliding between universes and not mention Quantum Leap. What's wrong with me? Quantum Leap, very important here. So, you know, the more I think about it, well, so we already highlighted the one axis, right? Which was how many worlds there are, single or multiple. There's a different thing that we can think about though, right? Which is how much control the characters have. Let's throw adventure and isekai up here for a second. How much control the characters had. So in the Ultima series, the character has full control over where they're going and when they jump. They can get there. They can't necessarily get back easily on their own, depending on what the situation is when they land, but they have total control. In sliders, they have control over when they go, but not where they go to. Quantum Leap, Sam has no control. Stargate, they technically have control over where they're going to, but the universe is so large and unknown that they don't know where they're going to get to. In that one episode of Futurama, they've got total control. In that one episode, in the Page Master, I think he has mostly control over jumping, but he's not got enough media literacy to know where he's going. Captain N, I think, is over here. And I believe Comic Zone was sort of also involuntary. And it wouldn't take me long to read in the music video for Aha, but I feel like she touches the page and jumps through, so I feel like she has relative control over going in there. Oh, whoops. This is relative control. This is less control. This is more control. I wish I had my wet erase markers with me, but they're in the office. So I want, here, we'll actually pick up Isekai. Isekai as a genre, I feel like in general, there's no control, right? Truck-sama slams into you, you die, and then you wake up in the new space. It was not something that you chose for yourself. I don't want something where the characters are going back and forth. This isn't what I'm after here in this column. I think that I want to be in a position where, in the story that I've been trying to tell at the very least, I've been in a position where the characters are trying to get together. They become aware of each other and then realize that they want to try and get together. I could stick with that theme, or I could have them fall in love after they get across. If they fall in love before they get across, then we're looking at something like this column, where, you know, I know what's on the other side of the page, like I did in the Aha, because she became very enamored of that greaser or whatever it was, right? And then was like, no, I want to jump into the comic book and shag him. Like that was the goal. And then there were the goons and whatnot that he had to protect her from. So if they know about each other before the transition between worlds, then I think this is the column we find ourselves in, where we have control over the motion between universes, but maybe it's expensive like it is in the Ultimate series. The Red Moon Gate only appears so often. Or it's tied to the magical comic book or the magical artifact like it is in the Aha music video. This specifically is the vehicle I used the last time I tried to write the story, where it was a magical TTRPG system that tried to suck her in. So I think I want to be in a position where there are few worlds, transitions between them is very expensive. So let's pull apart the things where we are jumping around every 30 seconds. Let's not think about those anymore. Pull those off to the side, and instead think about universes where we change very, very infrequently, and where that change is expensive. And in stalling to talk about that, I've forgotten the ones that I was specifically holding in my head, because there were a few. There were a few that I had in mind there where you had some control over transition worlds that happened like exactly once, and now it's gone. I've actually completely lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, right. Dead air, dead air, dead air. But the thing I was thinking about was, Planescape. Planescape Torment. Everyone in Planescape is Planeswalker, and planeswalking in the world of whatever the city that they find themselves in. I think it's the City of Doors. It's been a minute since I've played Planescape Torment. Everyone there is a planeswalker, but being a planeswalker is comparatively rare. Similarly, when Magic the Gathering cared about its fiction, planeswalkers were a big part of that. And planeswalking was, exclusive to powerful mages and rare and expensive and painful. And I think that's what I want, is I want this kind of world, which, did I write down fantasy at some point? It doesn't matter. Let's write it again. It turns out that sticky notes are effectively free. So I want some sort of fantasy land, I think. And I think that's going to complement the other theme that I want to touch on, which is when the character from our world gets to the place with the romantic interest, I want to do sort of a fish out of water thing. And having that be a fantasy world is going to facilitate that. You can get there, right? If it was a sci-fi world, we could still get there, right? Because I think everyone remembers the three seashells scene from the movie that I don't remember the name of, right? I don't remember the name of the film, but I do remember that our main character in that movie doesn't know how to wipe his ass in the new world, and that it's played for laughs, and to show how much the world has changed out from under him. So even though the world is still familiar in many aspects, is alien in many others, you can still get that fish out of water feeling if you move from a modern setting to a sci-fi setting and do some stuff with it. So maybe fantasy isn't written in stone. This is the sort of thing where I think if you're new to solo, you'd be tempted to roll dice and say, well, on a 1 through 3, it's a fantasy world, and on a 4 through 6, it's a tech world. But like, I want to be stuck in this narrative for a minute, so I want to be deliberate about it. Let's see if thinking about other elements of the game are revealing to us. So we don't really need the three seashells note anymore. I'm okay leaving those out there. So let's move on to the next one. So let's think about what the world feels about various social groups and what it doesn't tolerate in social groups, right? So specifically, these are star-crossed lovers. How difficult do I want that love to be? Do I want their love to be forbidden societally, or do I want their love to just be awkward between the two of them? And I think that I want to tell a relatively dark story. I think it's kind of a sad time if you're trans in America, and so while for many people that would mean, so I want the escapism, and I don't want to think about that when I'm sitting down and playing a game. Pardon me. In my case, I do want to think about that in the game. I'm probably going to use it as a vehicle to work through some big feelings that I have right now. So let's say that the character's love is going to be forbidden, and it's going to be forbidden because there's some sort of scarcity in the society. All right, that marker truly is dead. Dead and gone forever. Does this one pick up on the camera? There's some sort of societal scarcity. What does that look like? That looks fine. Around population. So this is your Last of Us, your Son of Man. And the natural implication of that is that, well, that didn't work at all. Ugh. So anyway, what I was saying is the natural implication of that is that love and marriage are for kids. Like the whole point is that you have your family, right? So that's going to be that's going to drive all sorts of things. That's basically going to be meaning that queer relationships, specifically the ones that make childbirth rarer, so two men being in love with each other, two women being in love with each other to the exclusion of allowing or without the ability to have a child, even just people who choose not to have children are going to be problematic. So are we gonna be so scarce that children are required to be wards of the state? Because if children are required to be wards of the state, then this isn't actually such a problem, because people could have their kids and then move on with their life. There's a fantasy novel series that my wife really likes that I don't remember the name of, where that's actually the thing. People are obligated to have a kid and then can move on with the romantic relationships that they care about, but they are obliged to have a child in a tightly controlled, almost eugenics way. So think about like Dune and the Bene Gesserit. I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be tight family units with a duty to provide. And it's not that you can't have that in a queer relationship. I feel like I do, but in this fantasy world, unless you have children, you aren't a family. So that's going to be the thing. I think that familial lines are going to be important. And that's going to provide internal pressure on various people to have children, right? Like in the same way that you may have experienced it yourself. Grandma's like, when am I getting those grandkids? Or your mother is like, when am I getting those grandkids? So I think that's going to be a common touch point across. And in terms of romantic default, the only two things that make sense with the rest of this is either, very similar to our culture today, which is default monogamous, centered around family units. You could do extended families in a single household, given the scarcity. That might make sense. So more of the things that were more common in, say, were more common in the past. I don't know enough about history to know actually when the nuclear family became ascendant, but the time before that. Alternatively, you could do like a bigamy thing, where a male head of household and then a set of wives. That could work too, because that aligns with the reproductive need. That I don't care strongly about, and I'm tempted to roll for. So what did we say? We said default monogamy, and then there was default monogamy or bigamy was an option. Polygamy in general. And then there was a question of, do you live with your family or do you live in the extended family household? If people have big families, then a single member of that family not reproducing isn't the thing. So the scarcity isn't just around population, the scarcity in general. And so we're going to say that relationships are probably also default monogamous. And that we have small families. One or two kids. Just enough to keep the population afloat, right? The third kid would be almost a coup. That gives you that gives you sort of a backdrop. And when I read that together, I'm like, well, that's cyberpunk, yo. Um, because when I think fantasy, I think, peasants and city states and lack of birth control. Um, there are reasons that birth rates could fall in a fantasy setting too, of course. In fact, Pillars of Eternity, it's not exactly the birth rate falling, but they're the Hollowed Children or whatever they're called. What a great game. What a great story. So you can get there with fantasy stuff too. So I still don't really have my answer. So we're going to continue to move on down my list of things to consider for the world. We still don't know if we're a tech world or a magic world. We could do steampunk and sort of slice the difference. That would give us, some space to explore some class issues and, well, steampunk traditionally explores some class issues. Arcanum is a great game in that space. It would allow us to have both tech and magic simultaneously, which is attractive. The characters' knowledge from our world might even be mildly applicable, though I was thinking about having the stand-in for me, the author, being a computer scientist too, because, well, it's easy for me to understand how that works. Maybe she's a chemist, maybe she's a mechanical engineer. Steampunk's really attractive there. That's a good fit. So maybe we finally have our answer. In terms of the world, magic, tech, belief being sort of the powering factors. I want magic to be rare and powerful and dangerous. And tech to be similar. The ability to learn enough to build interesting machines, to have the machinery necessary to build machines that build machines should be extremely rare. Most people should be sort of scraping together what they can to get by. Now the question of was it always rare is an interesting one. Have we had a golden era and have fallen from it, or are we in the pre-golden era where the information hasn't widely expanded? Speaking of Arcanum, I like if I'm gonna do steampunk, I like a steampunk story where magic and tech sit in a strong tension with one another, and there's this sort of no man's land where people, like, you just don't blend. That I like a lot, because I think that it provides a nice, well, there's just tension there, and that's nice. In terms of scarcity, we already established that it's population. Population is scarce, resources are scarce. What resources in specific? Well, anything that has to be constructed with labor. So that would be your ores, your foods, your literature, your art. But those aren't going to be thought of as scarce because they're luxuries in a certain point. But raw materials and people, human capital, are the things that are scarce. I think that there's an open question of how magic works in this universe. When I think about magic systems that I really like, Full Metal Alchemist comes to mind. It fits really well with the multiple worlds and magic having high cost, and so I want to take that note there. It also doesn't entirely not fit with the steampunk universe, so this is feeling pretty good. In terms of government and rebelliousness, right? Like, it's easy to imagine a world where magic is ascendant and tech is burgeoning, and the mages are trying to suppress technology. it could be class warfare stuff. So the old Regency is trying to maintain supremacy over the working class, the serfs and whatnot, even in the light of dying world and diminishing returns. I really like that for some reason. So and maybe we can just go full on the fucking nose, right? And say, look, there's this new incredibly powerful technology that lets us do something. I don't know if it's gather resources more efficiently, but it allows us to displace labor at the cost of accelerating the decay of the world. We could just go all in on allegory. And in terms of what's at stake, I want the big dangerous bugaboo to be exile, to be removed from society in some way. That feels good. So the next big thing is how do the characters get together? What's sort of the crossing mechanism? We sort of landed on deliberateness over here, but there's a question of cost and repeatability. I want there to be some... when I've tried the story in the past, there's been some communication between the character and the player, quote unquote, before they get across. So I do want there to be some sort of scrying mechanism that's cheap. Relative to crossing to so I know that's big for me. And then do people know about the worlds, vice versa? So I want the sort of the powerful mages in this steampunk universe, they know that there are other universes. Okay, that's the thing. That's exactly the thing. I've reinvented fucking Elon Musk from First Principles. Jesus Christ. So there's this rich ruling class that knows other worlds are powerful. And if they could just get out of this one, they'll be fine. So it doesn't actually matter if they destroy it and doom all of the lower class to death in a toxic void if they can get out. And the new technology that they've invented is the thing that's going to allow them to pull individuals and material across rifts en masse. Maybe the world is some sort of galactic or planeswalking sync point. Like it's a one-way door. You get in there, but you just can't get the fuck out. And they've discovered a technology that will actually let them breach out. So that's like Ravenlofty, right? Because I think Ravenloft was a planes trap like that. So that I like. That's got legs. And so there aren't institutions that police interworld contact because no one believes two worlds are real. Everyone in this world knows that this is the only thing and that there's no fantasy and no magic and that everything is goddamn boring, or it's actually really, really exciting because science is cool as shit, but I digress. So that gives us sort of the hook for getting out of the planar trap, but the question of how our character comes across. Why does this planar trap exist? We don't need to know. We do need to know that it does. And you can hear the fact that I live on a street with fire station now. So I don't know why the planar trap exists, and I don't know exactly how we get across it. But there's your mechanism. That feels good. So now we're looking at sort of the setting sketch just enough to give us somewhere to land with both characters. So for our character, again, I'm gonna be real boring with it. She lives in a city and works for a tech company. She's got an apartment, and she lives in a city without mass transit because she's American, and that's just how it goes. So I don't want to be more specific about it than that. She's got a stable, well-paying job, an unsatisfying love life, and doesn't necessarily feel passion in the work that she's doing, but it pays the bills. And then from the other side, our fantasy character, she's going to be from the underclass, which means that she's going to live in some sort of hovel or ghetto that is adjacent to the still relatively well-maintained center of opulence in her geographic region. They're going to be a harbor town or a coastal. They're going to be on the boundary between two parts of the world. I want them to be on the boundary between the place that is still dangerous as shit but marginally civilized and the wildness. And I don't know if that's a desert oasis or like on the borderline in the desert, so sort of like what happens in Numenera, or if that's on the border with the ocean and the ocean is rising and poisonous and horrible, which would work. So I don't know if I want my scarcity to be more Dune-ish or to be more Waterworld-ish. I'll give it some thought. So in both of those cases, there's water scarcity, right? Which is a population limiter in the extreme. And if the water limiting is from, desert stuff, or if the water limiting is from the water being unpotable and salt water and befouled salt water slowly getting into everything, both of those are interesting. I don't have a strong preference. I love Dune. I think in an effort, I also like Blades in the Dark though, right? And in Blades in the Dark, the ocean's fucking terrifying. But I don't have as much media familiarity with Waterworld and Blades in the Dark and other things where water is the great enemy as I do with Dune, having read all of the books multiple times. Don't read Chapter House. It's just not good. So I think we're gonna go with. Is there anything else? So it doesn't need to be a desert. It can just be a blighted wasteland. So the soil is foul. Nothing grows. The trees wither and petrify. So you could do that too. And that could slowly encroach. But then what would you do to stop the encroaching of it? What great work are the people of this horrible city obliged to continue to try and stand against the wall? So this is more like L5R, right? There's the blight, and then they literally have a great wall. But in this particular case, is it like a trench? If you dig sufficiently deep, or is it... No, it needs to be more like if they're literally killing the world to escape the planar trap, then it needs to not care about physical distance. So you can't like dig a trench to get it done, or anything like that. How are they powering this thing, and how does it create the toxicity? Are they if they are making waste and shipping it to a place sufficiently far away to dispose of it, that That fits more with the ocean model. So they're just going to dump shit into the ocean, and horrors are going to come from the deep. Horrors that they've inadvertently created that are going to spread more of the toxin. And they're creating the blight in the various lands near them via the things they process. That could work. Alternatively, we could go more Last of Us, and there's some magical, or not just Last of Us, Dragon Age. This is a common trope where there's some sort of magical disease that is the energy sapper, that is powering their ability to get out of the planar trap. What I don't want to do is do the Full Metal Alchemist thing and be like, yeah, actually World War II is just a power magic. And like modern conflict is going to generate souls that let us cast our soul magic. So I'm thinking dispersed city-states that poison the earth around them into this blighted, petrified tree. Anything that grows in the soil is bitter and toxic. The animals, the animals are violent, suddenly become violent and don't die naturally, and so on. That I like. So I think there's going to be some sort of insurgency that's looking to topple the men in power, and when the character from our world comes across, they're going to view her as both a threat and an asset. She knows things about technology that they don't. She can help accelerate their overthrow of the government, their defense of their lands, etc., etc., etc. But man, isn't it awfully convenient that this person that we have no knowledge of and has no history in our world just showed up all of a fucking sudden, and they're gonna not quite Mary Sue their way through this. Like, that feels like a fad. That's a fad. So I think that is gonna get us somewhere. And obviously, the people who are planeswalking, who are trying to get out of this planar trap, are going to view her as a threat, because I think they are. Are they hiding the fact that they're causing the blight? They're certainly hiding the fact that they're trying to get out of the planar trap. It's not well known. It's been guarded forever. So that's what they're doing. They're hiding the fact that they're getting out of the planar trap. No one actually knows, other than the most powerful mages who are in power in the regime. No one actually knows that planeswalking is possible. And then here comes a fucking planeswalker. So anytime anyone crosses the barrier, the powers that be get very, very antsy and try to bring them to heel. And so there's the fundamental tension. You've got the rebels who want this person for their scientific acumen and their sort of knowledge of what to them seems impossibly advanced technology. And you have the planeswalking aristocracy that wants them because they are aware of the big lie. I guess it's not the big lie, but they are aware of the big undercutting thing, which is that it's possible to walk between worlds, and they could reveal the fact that they're trying to escape and leave the other downtrodden folks holding the bag. That I really like. And so I think there's a question of if the rebels, like the rebels obviously have cells in all places. It's definitely going to be an insurgency style thing with the powerful empire that we're trying to topple, because like, who doesn't fucking love Star Wars or a billion other stories? That feels good for the sort of world that we're going to inhabit. I think I have enough here at this juncture, right? I think we've talked about some of the major beats. We don't necessarily need to know the name of every story. I can go to a name generator for that sort of stuff, because that I don't care deeply about. And given the kinds of note taking that I do, those are things that we can fix later. Where if we like decide that we don't like the name of the major city that we started in, I can just retcon that, right? And be like, well, A town is now Edelweiss or something. I don't know. So those aren't questions that I feel I need to answer meaningfully right now. But I feel like the whole, well, it's a steampunk thing, it's a class war thing, it's a planar trap they're trying to escape. That I think gives us a sufficient enough backdrop to move on to the next thing, which is talking about our characters. So when I sit down next time, it'll be after I've sort of gathered the transcript from this video and normalized those thoughts into an artifact. I'll probably publish that as well, just so you can see what I took the grist from this mill into. When we come back next time, we're going to be talking, I believe, about the characters. So we're going to do... No, looking at the page, there was some more world building that I wanted to do. So that would probably be factions, cities, their position, and things like that. But I think I am going to skip that and go straight to the characters. Sorry for the hemming and hawing here at the very end. I was just looking at my notes of what I plan to do next and was surprised by what I found there. At any rate, I'll be back next time with a little more world building before we get, well, a little more prep and setup before we get into the game proper. Thanks so much for stopping by.